Hi, Saxons. I'm Ms. Masters, your North High librarian, and this is First Chapter Friday. For those of you who haven't heard yet, the library is running a second semester reading challenge with a different theme each month. February's challenge was to read a book by a Black author in honor of Black History Month, so I've been reading chapters from books that fulfill that challenge for the past few weeks. This week, we're going to look ahead to March, which is Women's History Month. The challenge is to read a book that is both by a woman and features a female main character. Today's novel, Damsel, by Elena K. Arnold, fits the criteria. Let me start by reading the front flap of the book to you so that you know what you're getting into. The right has existed as long as anyone can remember. When the king dies, his son, the prince, must venture out into the Grey Lands, slay a fierce dragon, and rescue a damsel to be his bride. This is the way things have always been. When Amma wakes in the arms of Prince Emery, she knows none of this. She has no memory of what came before she was captured by the dragon, or what horrors she faced in its lair. She knows only this handsome young man, the story he tells of her rescue, and her destiny of sitting on a throne beside him. It's all like a dream, like something from a fairy tale. As Amma follows Emery to the kingdom of Harding, however, she discovers that not all is as it seems. There is more to the legends of the dragons and the damsels than anyone knows, and the greatest threats may not be behind her, but around her now, and closing in. Elena K. Arnold, author of the National Book Award finalist What Girls Are Made Of, has written a twisted and unforgettable fairy tale, one that is set at the incendiary point where power, oppression, and choice meet. Damsel, by Elena K. Arnold. It's divided into sections, so I will be reading to you from the first chapter of section 1. The Dragon's Blame. The castle seemed to grow from the cliffs that cupped the shoreline. Its jagged peaked turrets pierced the rain-heavy clouds above. Its windows were gaping mouths and gored-out eyes. Between the slate-gray cliffs and the smoke-gray sky and the churning gray sea and the ghost-gray mist, it was a gray place, indeed. It was so thoroughly gray that a traveler who lost his way could be blinded by it, by the overwhelming grayness that permeated everything, erasing vision entirely. Stay too long in this gray world, the legend went, and risk your eyes turning gray too. Risk your skin growing ashen. Risk your hair dulling to iron. Yes, it was a gray world. Sitting upon the broad back of his night-black steed, Prince Emery of Harding scanned the vast gray scene around him. There was the beach, quiet waves lapping upon the shoreline like a kitten at its dish of cream. The tameness and gentle repetition belying the fierceness Emery knew the great sea had hidden within it. There beneath his horse's hooves was a short pebbled beach, peppered with stones of all shades of gray, from nearly black to nearly white. Emery and his steed, whom he called Reynard, had emerged onto this beach from a dense forest, through which there was no trail. Emery had been obliged to lead his horse much of the way, slashing a path for them with his sword. As Emery had grown closer to the edge of the forest, the trees he encountered grew harder and harder, until, finally, he found that they were no longer made of wood, but rather petrified to stone. These trees even Emery's loyal, lethal sword had been powerless against, a fact that ignited a flame of anger in his chest. When he struck it, a tree should fall. That is what trees do. That is what they had always done, trees. It was their duty. But these last trees would not fall, and when Emery struck them with his sword, an awful clang rang out, and the impact of the blow vibrated up through Emery's sword arm and rattled all his bones. Not even a dent. Unacceptable. Yet he had been forced to accept it, had been forced to unsaddle Reynard so the horse was narrow enough to pick a path through the trees that refused to get out of the way. No matter, Emery had told himself as he flung the saddle back onto Reynard, as he fastened the girth. hoarse grunting, as he hefted himself into the saddle once again. He walked the horse along the beach, surveying, and Reynard picked a path through the pebbles. Emery would punish the forest on the dragon's flesh. For he knew it was the dragon's blame that the trees had turned to gray stone, just as it was the dragon's blame that this part of the world was misted dark with unspilled rain, and the dragon's blame that the sea was slate gray instead of blue-green, and the dragon's blame that the unblinking eye of the sun was dulled by a cataract of gray. When the dragon was slain, if he managed to slay it, this part of the world would brighten again, and Emery would be the light bringer, as well as king. He hated the dragon. It was that simple, and his hate was pure like cleansing fire. He breathed in and out his hatred as he sat upon his steed, as his eyes scanned the cliffs in front of him, searching for a way to climb them, though he knew already that there would be no easy path. Who had built this castle into these cliffs? It was a mystery without an answer. Had they built it, or had it been born? Some wizened elders claimed that the castle emerged from the craggy cliffs over millennia, growing a fraction of an inch a year, surfacing so slowly that its progress was imperceptible. Others countered that the castle had not emerged at all, but simply had always been, like the sea, like the cliffs themselves, and to attempt to trace their origin was a fool's mission. No one knew how the castle had come to be, and Emery did not care. He did not care why a sun hung in the sky. It did, and that was enough for him. As long as it warmed his back each day and disappeared each night, Emery had no desire to waste his time examining the whys and wherefores behind its existence. And that was how he felt about the castle and the cliffs, the sea, and the sky. The world was made. That was all. This resolved and set aside left Emery with just the question of how best to conquer it. "I'll have to scale it, Reynard," Emery said. The horse grunted, warm clouds puffing out from his enormous nostrils. "You'll have to wait behind," Emery told him, to which Reynard said nothing. That settled, Emery swung himself out of the saddle once again, landing on the shifting pebbles of the beach. They crunched together under his feet, like bones grinding. Reynard would not need to be tied. He was a good horse, and he wouldn't go far. And if Emery did tie him, and then were to die, either falling from the cliff or in the jaws of the dragon he expected to encounter up above, Reynard would die as well. Everything and everyone dies, of course, but dying while tied by the reins to an outcropping of rocks at the base of a cliff seemed like an undignified way to go, and Reynard was not an undignified animal, and Emery was not, he thought, a cruel master. Once again, Emery unhooked the long leather strap of the girth, pulling it from the brass ring at Reynard's side, unwinding it as the horse relaxed his gut. He heaved the saddle down from Reynard's proud, high back, revealing a square patch of sweat-wet fur, which Emery rubbed dry with the saddle blanket. Then he grabbed the crown piece of the bridle from behind Reynard's ears and pulled it forward, the bit clanking against the horse's teeth. Freed, Reynard stretched his long neck and wandered off, snuffling along the pebbled beach in search of the few gray tufts of grass. Emery considered himself to be horse-like in all the best ways. One thing he could do was place blinders on his own vision, focusing on the singular task in front of him, and this he did now, preparing himself for the climb. The saddle and its bags were slung across a boulder, and Emery rifled through them with practiced purpose, gathering what he would need: rope, a pickaxe, a leather pouch of fine powdered chalk, leather gloves, a bladder of fresh water, his sword, which was never far from his body. In his pocket was his lucky talisman, a rabbit's foot he cut himself from his first kill when he was 7 years old. Then he walked to the base of the cliffs, an almost vertical wall of slate, and placed his hands on its cold, hard surface. He looked up, craning his neck farther and farther back, and for a flash it seemed that the old legend had come true, as his field of vision filled so completely with gray. So much gray, so all-encompassing that Emery was blinded by it, and he felt his bowels loosen with fear. And for a second, he was a babe again, powerless and falling, with no knowledge of what was up and what was down, drowning in the gray that whirled around him, tumbling and helpless. But then, he caught sight of his own hand against the endless gray wall, and he remembered himself. He was not powerless. He was no babe. He was Emery of Harding, and he had a dragon to slay. If you want to read more of Elena K. Arnold's Damsel, you can order the print version for pickup at the library on the library's website, or you can borrow the electronic version on the Sora app or soraapp.com. Thanks for tuning in, Saxons, and have a great weekend.